So we are here to talk about Chapter 6, and we are learning this because 1.6 billion people are Muslims in the world today, and it's a very important topic to learn about. So the message of Muhammad in Mecca, sometimes spelled Mecca, a small town about 3,000 people, and a man named Muhammad was born in 570 AD. His father died when he was not yet 1, and his mother died when he was only 5. He was raised by relatives, from whom he learned how to buy, sell, and transport goods. He married, had children, and seemed to have a rewarding life. But he was not content. Bothered by his modern problems, at the time he spent his days in a nearby cave. One night in 610 AD, he states that a voice of the angel Gabriel called out, "Recite," 3 times. Over the next 23 years, he received and memorized everything the angel revealed and preached these words to others. Those words were written down in the Quran, which is the sacred book of Islam. And remember, Islam is the religion, and obviously publishing pictures of the Prophet Muhammad is frowned upon, and that's what caused the problems in France. Okay, so now we have the Rise of Islam, section 1 of your book, and you see the Arabs, the life of Muhammad, and then down below you see some different information. And to the right you can see a map of the area we're talking about, which you should be familiar with the news every single night, because obviously this is the hotbed of problems in the world. If you see that Arabs are a people that were nomads that lived on the Arabian Peninsula, which lacks water, that's an understatement, organizing into tribes with a leader called a sheikh. They lived as farmers and shepherds. They were polytheistic. They traced their lineage to the Jewish leader of Abraham and his son Ishmael. They built Mecca, the city of worship, and the sacred black stone seen down to the right, or the Kaaba. Due to tensions in Egypt and Mesopotamia, Mecca became an important trade route. Now, I listed all of this information about Muhammad a little bit ago, so you can read that. And then just so we know, Islam is the religion, Muslim are its followers. Very huge distinction. The Quran is Muhammad's revelations written down. They are monotheistic. They worship one God called Allah. And then Khadijah was the first follower. That was Muhammad's wife. And he had 5 children from Khadijah, and you can see the names of those people listed there. But after 3 years of preaching, he only had 30 followers. He left Medina in 622, which is considered year 1 of the Islam calendar. He became a religious and political and military leader. Mecca surrendered to Muhammad in a military-style takeover. And then he died 2 years later, which leaves things a little crazy because they don't know what to do with the leadership after that. But first, just a little background of Islam. You can see that there are 5 pillars, which are belief, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. You can see what those things are. And then there are the teachings of Muhammad. And he offers hope in the afterlife, the 5 pillars of faith. And then there's Sharia law, which of course is quite controversial in this day and age. And later on we'll get into that. And they believe that Jesus was a prophet, but was not a god. Okay? All right, so we're coming to the section where I'm going to apologize to anybody out there of the Islamic faith, because I'm about to destroy a bunch of names, just simply because I will get tongue-tied. We can see at the top, we are at section 2, the creation of an Arab empire and the Umayyads, a family. Abu Bakr succeeded Muhammad in 640 AD, took Syria from Byzantine control, and in 650 controlled the Persian Empire. If you look to the right, you can see the caliphs, and you can see the lineage of power, and then you can see the split. And that split is what causes a lot of problems to this day. And so you see the split to the right in the blue, and then you come to the left and you see the Sunni and Shiites there as well. And you could see the difference. Primarily, you could see that the Sunnis, there's 1.2 billion, while there's only 120 million Shia. So there are differences. And then in the center, the arrow points to the similarities that they believe in. Many, many similarities there. But of course, the differences create quite a problem. You can see the maps, the different Sunni and Shiites, and what they control in the areas. And at times they hate each other. And in places they don't. So, you can't always go by what's going on in the Middle East and apply that to Europe or Asia, or Europe or the United States. But you can definitely see the differences between the Sunni and Shiites right there in that particular diagram. So from that last slide, I hope that you do understand that there are two distinctive sects, and then those sects have, of course, radical groups, which we will discuss at the end, and we will not in any way, shape, or form cover all of the radical groups. From this slide, I want you to understand the Seljuk Turks and the Crusades for the most part, of course. And then down below, we have the Mongols. The Seljuk Turks were a strong army hired by the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt. The Seljuks were from Central Asia, and they were successful under the Abbasid Caliph or Caliphate. Seljuks were a tribe of Tartars from Central Asia who established a powerful empire in Persia in the 11th century. They captured Baghdad in 1055. The Caliph in Baghdad was so impressed with their strength and skill that he made their leader the Sultan. Now, if you go to the right, of course, the Crusades are a huge thing. Everybody studies the Crusades. It's a very famous time in history. And what that basically was were these Crusades where the Muslims had come into what's considered Jerusalem, the Holy Lands, all of that area, and were taking it over. And the Christians said, no, we want that for Christian worship. And, the Jews were still there, so it's as if nobody ever remembers them there. But these were the battles to take back that land. And so you could see the Crusades, the Byzantine Emperor. So anyway, it was just considered a noble holy war, and you can see this series of holy wars in which European Christians tried to retake the Holy Land, Jerusalem, from the Muslims, and all that came from all of that. So you can see the Pope gets involved, and there was even a crusade called the Children's Crusade where the children left Rome. I believe they were in a boat. And so what we have now is Section 3, Islamic civilization. And what you need to do, even though these are modern pictures, is think of these as every feature that you would see in an Islamic city or town. The city features. Islamic cities had distinctive physical appearance. The most impressive building was usually the palace for the caliphs and the local government officials like governors. There were also mosques, which you see to the right in Las Vegas, for worship. Mosques have distinctive features like towers that separate them from other buildings, and the bazaar seen below is a market found in most Islamic cities. Bazaars were monitored by local officials who made sure merchants kept the bazaar clean and followed the rules. Goods from across Europe and the Middle East and China were available for sale or trade in the bazaars. Now, society. According to Islam, all people have equal rights in the eyes of Allah. This was not necessarily the case for Arabian leaders, however, who had defined upper classes for ruling families, senior officials, and elites that included the wealthiest merchants. Slaves were also not considered equal. Slavery was widespread throughout the Arabic Empire. Slaves were used in the military and often freed if they proved their value in the home as domestic servants and farm labor. Islamic law made it clear that slaves should be treated fairly and that it was a good act to free slaves. Now, you cannot discuss Islamic civilization without what women go through. And so you can see on the right, that's today, but you can see on the left, the Quran granted women spiritual and social equality with men. In many cultures today, that has been taken away. Women did have the right to run businesses and own property, and they played a prominent role in the rise of Islam because obviously Khadijah, the wife of Muhammad, was the first convert. So a female was the first convert to this religion. Islamic teachings account for some differences in duty and responsibilities between men and women. So you can see that women had to have a male guardian if they left the house. It could be a father, brother, husband, or cousin, whatever. Marriages were arranged. Muslim men were allowed more than one wife, but of course women are not allowed more than one husband. The men did have to pay the dowry, which is a gift of money or goods in exchange for a bride. I like to say I'm worth 4 goats and a cow. Just kidding. Adultery, of course, is forbidden, but divorce was allowed. And corporal punishments, including So Islam spread, and older custom eroded these rights for women. So they ended up secluded in their home, and they were expected to cover their whole bodies in many different types, depending on where you live, of female garb. The one to the far right, the burqa, of course, is prominent in Afghanistan. And then you could see some of the things that still happen today in Saudi Arabia. They are not allowed to buy a Barbie. They are not allowed to enter a cemetery. They are not allowed to try on clothes when shopping. They can't compete in sports, swim, interact with men, wear clothes or makeup that show off the beauty, drive a car, even though that's not illegal. But there are religious police in these different areas. I do remember my students that went to war coming back and telling us that if a call to prayer was given and a shop did not close down quick enough, then that shop would have been closed down for a certain amount of days as punishment for not closing down by those police that police you for your religion in those countries. So the culture of Islam, and of course this is looking back at all of the advancements that the people that were Muslim made. So preserving knowledge, you can see that would it be a surprise to learn that it was an Arab that preserved most of the literature and mathematics left by the Greeks. When Europe was experiencing the Dark Ages, which means they're dark in history, they're not recording anything, after the fall of Rome, it was the Arab Empire that was experiencing a golden age. Arabs preserved the writings of Plato, Aristotle, and mathematic texts from India. After the Chinese invented paper, the Arabs used it to translate works and make them available to scholars. And then here we go with some names that I might mess up again. In medicine, we had Ibn Sina, who wrote the medical encyclopedia that stressed the contagious nature of diseases. This is before people knew what a germ was. So imagine that he's understanding the concept of catching a disease. He demonstrated that disease could be spread through contaminated water, and his work became the basic medical book for universities in Europe. Love that drawing, that medical book drawing there. As far as science and history go, the astrolabe is constantly looked at because this, of course, helps people to sail across oceans and navigate by the stars. So the Muslims set up the observatory in Baghdad to study astronomy. They knew the earth was round, and they named many of the stars and constellations. They also perfected the astrolabe, an instrument used by sailors to determine their location by using the positions of the stars and planets. The astrolabe made it possible for Europeans to sail to America. Muslim scholars took interest in writing history. Ibn Khaldun, who lived in the 1300s, wrote an Introductions to History. Ibn Khaldun's book argued that history was cyclical, I agree with him, and that patterns of birth, growth, and decay would repeat throughout history. He sought the scientific basis for the cycle, using political and social factors that determine the course of history. The rise and fall of political governments and all those types of things. So philosophy and mathematics, the Arabs preserved much of what we know about ancient Greek philosophy, but they also expanded their ideas of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Ibn Rushd was a philosopher in Cordoba, Spain. He wrote a commentary on Aristotle's surviving works. When Europeans received Aristotle's translations in the 1100s, they also received Ibn Rushd commentaries. Muslims adopted the numerical system of India, including the use of zero. I know that that's a strange thing to be a big deal, but if you know math, a zero is a big deal. This eventually became known as the Arabic system and is still used today. In the 800s, the Arab mathematician described and developed the mathematical discipline of algebra. So now you know who to blame for that class if you are struggling in algebra. Another site in Islam culture is, of course, literature and art and architecture. Now, how could you not know about the 1001 Arabian Nights? Fascinating story, one of which, of course, is Aladdin. Aladdin, there once lived a poor tailor who had a son called Aladdin, a careless idle boy who would do nothing but play all day long in the streets with the idle boys like himself. Classic, written by Omar Khayyam, who lived in the 12th century. He wrote poetry and famous throughout the Arab Empire. Islamic art is a blend of Arab, Turkish, and Persian traditions. The best expression of Islamic art is in their holiest building, the mosques. And then you can see some of that amazing architecture down there. The Great Mosque of Samarra is in Iraq and was the world's largest mosque when it was built. It is famous for its minaret. You can see that tower and it winds all the way up. The tower from which the muezzin, the crier, the person that calls out to prayer those 5 times a day, calls prayer from. So you guys can see a little bit more about the palaces and the mosques here to the right. I really wanted you to see some of these famous, beautiful buildings and the way that they would build with the centers free to have courtyards, and then the air would move through the buildings better, and there was more air circulation if there was an actual center that was open. Mosques, of course, were built for worship to reflect the glory of Allah. Arabs used columns, arches, and domes in much of their architecture. One of the most famous mosques is the mosque at Cordoba, Spain, and you can see some of those pictures there. No representation of the Prophet Muhammad ever adorns a mosque, nor do any figures, as Muhammad warned against portraying living beings. He was afraid that somebody would begin to worship him, and not as a prophet, but as a god, and he felt that that's what happened to Christianity and didn't want that to happen. So the next 3 slides are Middle East current events, and that seems to be what you guys were asking for. And so I took 3 of these extreme groups so that you could see a little bit about them and you could dissect them. And this in by no way is all of them, but it's just the 3 that seem to be on the news most frequently. There are a couple more, but you can see the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda, and of course ISIS. And you can see some of their different symbols here. And when we look at the Taliban, it came out of northern Pakistan and moved to Afghanistan. Okay, so the Taliban was condemned internationally for their brutal repression of women. Remember the burqa? That's the group we're talking about. So one of the things that they did is you can see Malala. She was, of course, shot in the head. They came to kill her deliberately because her family liked to educate girls. And that is her message, to always have girls educated and to give them the opportunity to be educated, because in these societies, women do not have the option to go to school. You can see Al-Qaeda is also called the base, and this is out of Afghanistan. And of course, they take responsibility for the September 11th attacks in the United States. This is where we get Osama bin Laden. So when you're looking at these different groups, you know Osama bin Laden was a part of Al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. And then, of course, ISIS. By the way, Osama bin Laden was not from Afghanistan. ISIS, or ISIL, Islamic State, the militant group, was established in the by a Jordanian national, Abu Musab al-Zawahiri. Now, it doesn't believe in borders. It considers other Muslim groups to be apostates, which means they're bad. And anybody that worships Jesus, you're an apostate because you think he's a god. And then they consider themselves Sunni, and they began in Iraq. Very popular for the atrocities that they are doing around the world. So all of these groups, you could see the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS on this map, but I would say that, you know, I'm still not discussing Boko Haram that stole 200 girls and forced them into marriages with their people in Africa. And you can see the different groups throughout Europe aren't represented here either. Of course, ISIS being one of the fastest spreading groups into Europe, and they want to form sleeper cells or lone wolf attackers that don't have to go to Turkey and Syria to be a part of them, but do the attacks from there. So these are the parts of the world where the extreme Islamist groups are located, but they are spreading to the countries that are considered westernized. All right, so you can see all of that. And then our final slide are just basically 2 words that you also hear a ton about in the news: jihad and Sharia law. And so a jihad, there are conflicting definitions about jihad. One is a violent definition of war and takeover, while the other is used as a personal struggle. Do you think this is a personal struggle, a physical struggle, or just a mental war? Think about that. The extreme groups consider it actual war, while the non-extreme Islamic groups, like groups that are found in America, think of it more as a mental struggle. So I have Webster's dictionary definition there, but then there's 2 definitions below that come out of different groups. And so you can see it is the Islamic term referring to the religious duty of Muslims to maintain the religion. In Arabic, the word jihad is a noun meaning to strive, to apply oneself, to struggle, to preserve. In the linguistic sense, the Arabic word jihad means struggling or striving and applies to any effort exerted by anyone. Like if you needed to stop smoking, you know, something like that, then that's your struggle. That's your jihad. Instead of, say, I'm going to kill everybody that doesn't agree with my religion. So you can see the 2 extremes for the word jihad. Then you can see Sharia law. And Sharia law, of course, again, some people feel that if there was Sharia law in the United States, it's just a representation taken on by the church, not by our legal system. And they're trying to make that delineation between our legal system and the Sharia church legal system. Because as you can see, there are many things within Sharia law that this particular section that I cut out is about women. And just some different aspects of what can be done to women if they are not living the life that the men in their lives call them to live. And so, but again, some people feel that it's not as extreme as what we read here. So there's a lot that you get to learn and decipher on your own, that I just get to present the information, and then you get to come up with those answers on your own, or maybe in your own family, or maybe even in your own faith.